Well, we are now just 6 weeks ahead of the election, and President Trump is neck and neck with Joe Biden in the battle for Georgia and two other red states. The president fighting to stay ahead of Biden in Georgia and Texas while narrowly trailing him in Iowa. A poll conducted by the New York Times and Siena College shows women voters overwhelmingly support Biden. This gender gap helping the former vice president make inroads into conservative territory. In Georgia, Biden leads among women by 10 points, while President Trump is ahead with men by 11 points. We spoke with Emory professor Andra Gillespie, who says this trend is pretty common because women tend to vote more Democratic.
Women being more likely in their roles as caretakers to care about issues like education and healthcare. And those are issues that Democrats have a perceptual advantage on. Women being, less inclined to support defense policies that would push people to war. So thinking about certain types of gender stereotypes there. Also thinking about the impact of second wave feminism and just the in general financial independence of women. So these are things that would attract them to the Democratic Party.
The New York Times reports the majority of voters say their minds are already made up about who they're going to vote for, leaving relatively little room for late developments to shift the trajectory of the race.